Alrighty. So yeah, if anyone's watching, I think I have like 4 people watching. If you have any questions about JavaScript that you want me to try to answer, I could try my best to kind of teach them live. Probably do a live for like 30 minutes or an hour. So now is a good time to just ask whatever questions you might have. If no one asks questions, then I'll probably just do some CSS battles or something. I'll keep my chat open. How's it going, y'all? Just woke up, so still a little tired. What's up, Marie? What's up, Sai? How do you pronounce it? Say? Krishna? Alright, so for the people watching, is there any JavaScript concepts that you want to kind of talk about or have questions on, or y'all just kind of join in for the stream? We just kind of go through some ES6 features. What's up, Tina? That's my wife, by the way, Tina. My #1 fan, has the most hearts from all my comments. Alright, so someone did ask about the spread operator, so I guess I'll kind of talk about that if no one else has anything else to suggest. So inside of ES6, they added a feature called the spread operator. And that is basically when you have like the ... dots. You probably have seen this in tutorials and stuff. It's probably one of the most useful like features, in my opinion, that's been added to JavaScript. So for anyone who doesn't really know what it does, you can use it for like basically objects and arrays. So just kind of show you, the most common use case that you see like in React all the time is basically concatenating arrays or adding arrays together. So like if I have an array of like 1, 2, 3, and I wanted to add that to another array. So if I say like other is equal to A, B, C, you can use the spread operator to kind of combine them if you want to. So I can say const combined is equal to, I'll make a new array. I can say spread of the first array. So ... the first array. And then I can say ... of other. And if we go down here and just print this out, and load up my terminal so we can actually see what's going on. So notice down here, hopefully it's not blocking. You can see that it kind of combined those two arrays together. And we, like, if you are new to React, you probably have seen this used a lot for like objects. So this is the array example. You can use it to combine arrays. Let's show it with an object as well. So let's just go down here. I guess I could comment all this stuff out. So let's say you have an object that has some properties on it. And you wanted to kind of add on new properties to it dynamically. So I can make a new object called new object. You can also use the spread operator to kind of combine objects together. So I can do ... object, and that'll take basically all the properties and values of this object and put them directly onto this new object. And then I can add new things to it. So I could say like, is paid customer is true. And then if I were to print this one out and run this, you'll notice that it prints out the object with all 3 properties here, right? So I basically took this object and it combined it with this one. There's other ways to do this. One thing I like to do is use object assign. So let's say you wanted to actually add the properties directly to this object, right? So one thing you could do instead of doing the spread operator, which a lot of people will argue this is a better approach because it's immutable. It returns you a new object and it doesn't modify this one. But for some reason, let's say you wanted to add properties to this one, you can combine arrays by doing an object assign. So if I do object.assign, pass it object, and then pass it a new object over here, I could do this. And now if I were to print out the old object, I'm jumping all around. Print that out. Notice that that printed out the exact same thing, but this is modifying this object. So it's adding that property, which is going to be pretty much persisted wherever you use this object. All right, so that was a good little, hopefully a good introduction. Let's see. So someone asked, I'm thinking about making a really simple booking/appointment website with just vanilla JS. I'm having troubles planning out the logic. So I think I need a little bit more information about what type of logic you're having troubles planning for. So like a booking appointment website, like that's probably a multi-page application. So you might have different index files, and inside each index file, you probably have, I don't know, let's say one's like a calendar. I guess I need more information about like what exactly you want related to JavaScript, because this is a stream about teaching JavaScript. There's something more specific of like the features of JavaScript I could help answer there, then let me know. But kind of a very broad question, I think. Someone says, could you explain or suggest some useful methods of both array and objects for React? Hold on. I should really go get a cup of water. My throat is like super raspy. Could you explain or suggest some useful methods of both array and object for React? So, Hun, could you give... I'm not sure I fully understand this question. Like, do you mean like the array methods, like map or filter? I'll come back to this one. Hey, what's up? Keenan? Kanan? Sorry. Yeah, this guy's been like watching my stuff from like the start for a long time. This is like, other than my wife, he's like my #1 fan. He's my second fan, I'd say. All right. Please teach us to update, push, delete object properties with a function. Okay, so this one I could do. I'll come back to this question if you can kind of re-ask it, because I'm not sure I understand like what you mean. So let's focus on this one. Please teach us to update, push, delete object properties with the function. All right, so let's clear all this stuff out. So let's say we have an object, again, that has like a name of Bob. Aman Nunez. Hopefully, sorry if I pronounce your names incorrectly, y'all. But he wants to update object properties with a function. So let's just say we have a function that says set age. Maybe. I'm not sure if this is what he's asking, but we'll have a function called set age. And that needs to take in a object because he wants to modify the object. So I'm going to pass in object to modify. And let's just say that this adds on a property called age. So to add properties to an existing object, you simply just do a dot. There's two ways to do it, but this way you do a dot. You can type age, and then you could do like 20 or something. And then what we could do is call it down here. So I could say set age, pass it object, and then console log that object. Okay, so let's run this. That should probably be a semicolon, so let's run it again. Yo, y'all let me know if my head is blocking this. I moved it over to the left side because I don't want to block the chat, but I need to put a sticker on my screen so I know where the top of my head is. But, oh yeah, so going back to what I was just kind of talking about, notice here we have a function, takes in an object, adds an age property of 20, and when you call it, it's going to modify whatever you pass in. So I could pass in whatever object I wanted to here. Could just be a blank object if you wanted to. And when you run it, it's going to just attach a property to it. And there's other ways you can do it. Like you could do the brackets here. So this is one notation that people use a lot. I think it's less common than the other approach I did. This does the exact same thing. It basically accesses that property or key in the object and just puts a value on it. They also want to update. Yeah, I don't know. Just this person said I think he's talking about getters and setters. I might be wrong, but yeah, when I see push, like you don't push things onto objects. Okay, that's more for arrays. So that's just some terminology to kind of understand. Pushing and popping is from arrays and collections. Update and delete. I mean, if you wanted to update something, you just basically access the same property, right? So if I said like this is the name of Bob, to update Bob, you just change this to like dot Bob, and this could be whatever you want. So rerun that. Notice that. Oh, this needs to be named. So you can kind of modify existing properties as well by just accessing that same key. Notice this key says name and this key says name. You can just overwrite properties like that. Let's see. Oh, and then deleting. Okay, so delete is pretty simple. Hopefully this isn't confusing that I have like this object called setAge, but I'm doing like other stuff in it. I'm just going to call this a function that's called stuff or do stuff. And yeah, so let's do the delete real quick, and I can kind of look at the chat and see if there's anything else I can answer. So for delete, you basically do the same thing. You want to write in JavaScript basically the object property that you're focusing on, and you just put delete in front of it. Okay, so now when I run this, notice that the original object had Bob on it, but now it's just blank. Okay, so it deleted that name property off of this. And if this had like age on it, again, see that it has only age, and that's because we deleted name from it. You can take this a step further, like you can pass in a key. This is something that's really important to understand, so listen up. If you wanted to dynamically delete things based on like a key, you can use that bracket notation here. This is where it comes in handy, and you can say delete whatever key I passed in. So if I call do stuff and I pass an age, now it's going to actually dynamically fetch the age property and just delete it from the object. So I could do this with age, I could do it with name. Do that. So I hope that kind of answers some of your questions. I don't really know if that's what you're answering, but or what you're asking. You said, thanks for answering it. How did you have a console on your Visual Studio? Yeah, if you just, on Mac, I do Control tilde. So the key right next to the left of number 1, if you do Control tilde and open that up, I think you can also do like Shift Command U to load up this thing down here. What else can you do? You can go up to the top. You can click New Terminal, and that'll load up a terminal, and then you can start just like going to the folder and doing stuff that you want. So that is how you load up the terminal in VS Code. This is super important to know because when you get into more advanced stuff, you use the terminal all the time. So just keep that in mind. Let's see. So I think I answered that question, hopefully. Yes, it used as a function arg sometimes. There's one more thing I want to talk about spread. Sorry, this is not related to your questions, but this is really interesting to know. So you can use the spread operator to also pass it into functions because someone mentioned that. I think who mentioned that? I think it was Hun who mentioned that. So let's say you wanted to find like the max number in an array of numbers, right? So there is a JavaScript max function you can call. So I can say const math.max. Oops, not const. Console log math.max of. You can basically pass it numbers. So I could do like this. And if I run this, notice that it prints out 30, okay? But the issue with this is that if I just pass in numbers, we have an array called numbers up here. If I just pass in numbers to this, it crashes, okay? Because that's because the max function doesn't know what to do with an array. It needs a comma delimited argument list that it kind of runs its logic over. So what you can do is that spread operator, if you look at the function definition, my pop-up that comes up, it says math and max, the first argument is dot 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 values, which happens to be an array of numbers. So what you could do is just do the spread operator. You know what? I messed that up because I had number here, but again, you can see it's printing out not a number. So it's not really doing what you think it should do. But what I was getting at is just add the dot 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 spread operator and you should see it start working again. So this is really useful if you want to like take an array of things and pass them all into the arguments parameters list of a function. I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff you can do with spread, but okay, let's see. So Maria is saying, like, given a list of available apps, you pick an appointment and it'll say you're booked all appointments. Okay, let's try to answer this question. I'll try the best I can. It's going to be hard without an actual like UI to see what's going on, but let's say you have a function called like book appointment. To give some context, she asked, or he, yeah, Marie, sorry. They asked up here that they're making a really simple booking appointment website with vanilla.js, and they're having trouble planning out the logic. And then they kind of clarify down here a small little use case. So they basically have a way to, let's say, if you envision like a UI where you have, I don't know, a list of appointments, and there's a blue button on it that says book appointment from like 11 to 12. What you could do is behind the scenes, let's say you had an array of appointments, and each appointment had a time. So we'll just say like 10. Bear with me, this is like pseudocode, so it's not going to be perfect. And what you could do is have multiples of these. So let's just say there's 2. So one appointment could be at 11 or 10 to 11. And the other one could be from 11 to 12. And what I guess she's asking is, how do I make it so I can like delete this, or so that people can't book it twice in a row? So you might want to have a function that from the UI, when you click on that book appointment function, or when you click on that book appointment button, it calls a function which is going to take in an appointment. Okay, and what you want to do is, one approach is probably just delete that appointment from your appointments list so that people can't actually see it anymore. So it's kind of like claimed, I guess. Or you could have like a boolean on here that says like is filled. There's so many different ways you can do this. And it gets more complex if you add in a backend and stuff like that. So let's say you have both appointments are available, is filled to set the false for both of them. But what happens is you say you wanted to book appointment. Sorry, I'm just going to add IDs to this. Let's say they click appointment ID of 2 in the UI, okay? So what we want to do is we want to loop through this array. We want to find the appointment that has ID of 2, and we probably want to either set this is filled to true or just delete it from the array. They want to delete this from a list, so let's just go with that logic. So with JavaScript, one approach you could do is you could just do a filter. You could do a delete. You could do a for loop and try to find the ID. I'm going to do an index, so I'm going to do find index of appointments. Oops. Find, and you could find the appointment where the appointment ID is equal to the one that was passed in. Okay. Actually, I'm going to do find index. So this will give me the index in the array where I want to delete that appointment. And since she doesn't care about this is filled stuff, let's just get rid of that. And then once you have the location of where that appointment is in your array, you could basically delete it. So in JavaScript, to delete stuff from an index, you have to use splice. So I'm going to say appointments.splice, give the index, and give it 1. And that'll remove that from the array. So let's just make sure this works. I'm going to print out, my keyboard's broken, so it's hard to like type sometimes. Let's just print out the appointments without calling this. So let me move up some. So if I run this, we should get an array of 2 appointments, right? But let's say I wanted to call book appointment before I print it out. I could pass an appointment ID of 2, run it, and notice that the second appointment, which is this one, was kind of deleted from the array. Okay, so that's one way you could do it. Again, you could have like a boolean on this, and you could just find that appointment and then set the boolean to true, so that you might want to still have it showing up in the UI, but just gray it out. And then you could have some logic to say like, if is booked is true, make it gray, else keep it like it normally looks. I hope that helped answer your question. If not, I can come back to it, but let's go down the list. Okay, so what's an easy backend to use with it? All right, so if you wanted to expand upon this, like, there's going to be a lot more stuff I have to explain, and that's probably out of the scope of this stream, which is just like JavaScript concepts. But instead of having this happen in the front end, you have a blue book appointment button. You click it. It's going to make a request to your backend, maybe like a delete request to a /appointments endpoint if you're using like REST API. And then that's when you kind of run this logic, or you might want to, actually, you probably would have run this in your backend. This logic would not even apply to you. You'd have a backend do maybe like a MongoDB delete call or a MongoDB find operation to get that appointment back, change it up a little bit, and then persist it again. And then when it's done, your UI can just refresh, or it can kind of just behind the scenes make it look like the appointment has been booked. So you can remove it from the list, or you can kind of modify the CSS to make it look booked. So, sorry, it's I hope that helped. I don't know. But your question is, what is an easy backend? I would just use Node. I like using Node because you already know JavaScript for the front end stuff, right? So to just bring in Node and start coding a backend with JavaScript is much easier than if you had to go learn like Golang for your backend, or had to go learn Python or PHP, right? To kind of context switch between languages to write your front end and your backend is really confusing in my opinion as a beginner. And even as a professional, like working full time, it's hard to context switch between languages because they all have different ways of doing stuff. So it's like you don't want to sit here and waste 5 minutes trying to remember how to do a loop in Python on your backend when you already know how to do it in your front end. So I would say just use Node because you know JavaScript already, hopefully. All right. I'm always confused when the spread operator is used on Vue, for example. When using Vuex, we need to pass the Vuex method to the component, so it uses a spread operator, but I don't really get why. I'm trying to think a little bit. I gotta make sure I understand this. All right, let me see. I don't know if Pedro's still watching, but let me try to address this. What's up, Tech Rally? By the way, this is another YouTuber, so go check out his channel, Tech Rally. Let's see. Got some really cool videos. He does a lot of like interviewing with people, just different developers, like kind of share their stories of how they got into web development and how they got into programming, and just a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, check him out. Really cool guy. Little shout out to him. Let's see. Let's go back to, what was I doing? I think Pedro's talking about like, let me clear this stuff. So in Vue, you usually have like a script tag, and then you have your module, right? I don't remember exactly how the syntax is, but then you usually have like methods, which is an array. You could also have like getters, which is an array. But usually there's a, like you have Vuex, some other files, your Vuex stuff. But then you typically do like get methods, and then you do an array of like things. So I could do like update user, fetch user, something like that. I think that's how you do it. I think there's also like a get getters, so I could say like user here. All that's doing is basically, you know, and let me actually look this up so I don't teach you some bad stuff. Let me go to Vuex real quick. Methods. Hitters, maybe? Mutations? Oh, it's called map. I think it's map mutations. Yeah. So typically, if you're using Vuex and Vue, you usually like import a map mutations and then you use that here. So you can see like map mutations and then you pass it in the methods. I think behind the scenes, what this is really doing is this is just returning an object for you. Okay, so if you go back to the earlier in the stream where I talked about what the spread operator does, there's probably a function called, oops, map mutations, which takes in an array of keys, and that's just going to return you some type of object that has like update user that does something. Gosh, my keyboard is so messed up. All right, so it's doing more behind the scenes to basically take a larger object and filter out the ones that you want. But what it's probably doing is just returning an object here that has update user and fetch user. And then when you call map mutations here, all that's doing is taking those two objects and spreading them onto the original array. So let's say you already had some methods here called like log out, like that, or also log in. All right, so you already had a logout method defined inside your component in Vue, and you're basically just spreading on those methods onto that methods object so that inside of your actual template, this is how you do it, template, you can actually start calling those, okay? So, I mean, I think you understand now, but like, was it at click? You can call like log out or something. Sorry, this code looks so messy, but I probably should just make a Vue component here. But I don't know if that explained your question. If I answered your question, or if you even still watching. Oh, he is still watching. Methods, map actions. Yeah, so I mean, like, let me know if that makes sense to you all. I should probably just make a Vue component. Test.vue. Open that up. I'm getting into the realm of Vue, so I think I should kind of like stop teaching about Vue here and go back to JavaScript because that's what this stream is about. But yeah, let me know if that actually helped you. What's up? So D Thompson Dev, also he's a YouTuber. He also has a huge Twitter following, so check him out as well. I'll just post in his channel here. Check him out. He's got some really good motivational videos and just tips and tricks of how you can actually get better at programming and how to stay focused and stuff like that. Just to be successful as a programmer if you're trying to learn. So definitely go check him out. Really cool guy. All right, let's see. Backend on Node or C#. Again, like, I personally would do Node because I already know JavaScript on the front end, so it keeps it easier in my brain to just switch from JavaScript from the front end to the back end. Instead of having to switch to a completely different language, like C# is, you know, object-oriented. It's very similar to Java, and switching between a dynamic language like JavaScript to a static language like C#, just kind of confusing for me, but C# is probably a lot more elegant and probably a lot better language in my opinion, but the fact that you can write JavaScript in the front end and in the back end just really helps me out. But yeah, C# has some cool stuff. Like I think, was it Blazor? That's a cool framework to check out. You can build like cool web applications using Blazor. So yeah, I'm not gonna say don't use C#, but I personally just use Node because it's easier for me. All right. How did you have, oh yeah, I already answered this one. So when we return, I'm not sure if this is a question or if you're answering someone else. When we use return. Like when do we use return? I'm going to treat this like a question. So inside JavaScript, you typically write functions, right? These functions are ways to encapsulate logic so that you can run it over and over again to kind of dry up your code, to keep your code clean and concise. So again, let's say we had a function called like get max, I guess. Try this out. So his question is, when do we use return? Well, typically if the function needs to do some computation on a list or generate something, and you want to use whatever the answer is, right? So if I go and like, as an analogy, if I go to my friend and tell him to tell me what his phone number is, he needs to return that phone number to me, right? If I don't, like, if he doesn't actually give me that phone number back, I can't do anything with it. So same thing with a function. If you call a function, you want it to return something to you so you can actually do something with it, right? So if you have a function that says get max, you want it to return the max number that it found inside this array of numbers. And most functions should probably return something. If you have a function that's not returning something, then I question what is the point of the function. Maybe it's doing a bunch of side effects and doing a bunch of like mutations on the objects that you pass in. But I would say in general, like 99, 95% of your functions should probably return something, or else you're probably doing some type of ugly way of doing logic. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, to sum that up, all functions should probably return something after they do their calculation on what you want them to do. If that's a confusing answer, then I would definitely recommend you go and read more about functions. What is the purpose of a function? How does a function help your program become more scalable and cleaner? Here's some real life app examples implementing the spread operator. Okay. Yeah, so she's asking, what are some real life app examples implementing the spread operator? And we kind of saw one here, like almost every library and framework that you see these days is using the spread operator. So you're going to see this in documentation when you try to learn new libraries like Vue or React. Like if I go to the React docs, like I guarantee you they have like a set state somewhere. Okay, side tangent. I really don't like the React docs because a lot of this documentation is written using like the old, not I don't want to say old, but it's written using like the class notation. But it's like everyone uses hooks. So it's like you're reading through these documentations, you're seeing a bunch of examples of the class notation, but it's like, yo, everyone uses hook these days. Like, okay, let's go to set state. Okay, so the question I'm trying to answer is what is what is the real life use cases of the spread operator? Okay, well, I guarantee you, if you're using React, you're gonna have to use spread because typically there's like a function called set state, and if you have some state that's like an object, again, you typically want to either spread the current value onto it and then update like again an age here. It's hard to answer this question, but spread is just used in a lot of different places to keep your code cleaner and to make it easier to use. So I definitely recommend you look into it. I don't know if that was a good answer for your question, but it's just it's like another tool that you can use to really help your code look cleaner, and just do more with writing less code. How to draw rect on mouse move on HTML canvas. Let me scroll down, make sure there's no like other things. I'll come back up to this. Can I go over promises? Yeah, I can do that in a second. All right. There's a lot of questions, so I hope when I start this stream. 1 second. All right, where was I? Sorry if it takes me a while to get to your questions. There's a ton of questions here, and I have a lot of people watching, so this is crazy. This one might be how to draw rect on mouse move on HTML canvas. I don't know if I want to address this. This is more of like getting into actually like JavaScript mixed with HTML and CSS. And it's kind of more complex, but I could come back maybe and look at that. I feel bad kind of skipping over this question, but all right, anyway. Can I go over promises? Yep. All right, so again, this stream is like for JavaScript questions, just mainly about the concepts and stuff. So promises, arrays, loops, mapping, filters, spread operator, destructuring objects, stuff like that. If you're asking questions that are like much more higher level, like building web applications or backends and REST APIs, I probably won't answer it in this stream just because it takes a long time to answer those questions because it's a lot more complex. Okay, so promises. Let's see if I can do this because promises are pretty confusing. So typically in JavaScript, you need to do like requests to a backend, or you need to do some type of asynchronous code. Okay, so if I already lost you there with asynchronous code, you might want to go read up on that. But basically, code that runs, it might take a while, it might take 5 seconds, 10 seconds. But you don't want your entire browser or your entire node application to just sit there waiting for that request to finish. You might need to do more computations. A good example of this is like on our backend, we have an endpoint that needs to fetch data from 3 different databases, but you don't want it to like fetch from the first one, wait 5 seconds, fetch from the second database, wait 3 seconds. You want it to fetch from all 3 at the same time, and when they all resolve, when they all come back, that's when you do some more computation. So you can do something like a promise all in that example, but let's keep it simple. Promises are just a way to wrap asynchronous code so that your JavaScript code can like execute when it's done. Okay, so the easiest way to do this is there should be a promise class built into JavaScript. Like I said, like new promise. All right, so typically a promise has like this whole concept of resolving and rejecting. Resolving means that that asynchronous operation is done. So again, like if you make a request to your backend and it takes 5 seconds, after those 5 seconds, you might get an array back or some data back, and you want to resolve it. So when you resolve it, you're basically telling the other places in your code that, hey, this asynchronous operation is done. You can run some logic now. So just to kind of show you that, let's just call it make request. And what we could do is call it. Okay, so let me take a step back. We made a promise, and then you can start attaching .thens to it. And the then is going to be the results of whatever that promise resolved. So let's do this. Console log that out. See this? I was trying, this is the key to my MacBook. Okay. There's like 3 that broke off. So every time I try to type O or shift, my keys come out. And it's very hard to code when your keys are popping off. All right, so let's run this. This won't actually do anything. All right, so going back to the whole resolve thing, let's say again we hit a backend endpoint and it returns us some data. Promises are probably like the most complex thing in JavaScript. All right, so this right here, this is, I don't know if this is the best example. I should probably actually do like a real life use case of hitting a backend endpoint. But again, inside of here, this would probably be some logic to fetch stuff from a backend. And when it's done at some point, you're going to resolve that. So resolve is kind of like a return statement and a function. So we're just returning an object of values 1, 2, 3. And then later on in your code, anywhere that needs to use that can say .then. Okay, so notice here we printed out results here, and that printed out 1, 2, 3. That's kind of how a promise works at a really high level with a really fast explanation that probably wasn't that good. But let's also talk about the reject method. So reject is a way to basically say like, hey, something went wrong with that request, and it allows you to basically listen for that other places in your code. So let's say instead this rejected some error that says something went wrong. So instead of resolving, you reject. So if I run this, nothing's going to print out. In fact, I think it bubbled up the error. So what you want to do is instead of a dot then, you can also attach a catch to kind of handle that error. So let's say you make a request to the backend, some error happens, then in that case, maybe in your UI, you want to show a modal that says like, hey, something went wrong. Do you want to retry? Or I don't know, refresh your page, try again. So what you can do here is you can attach a catch statement. There goes that O popping off my keyboard. And we could just print out the error here. Message is how you do it. All right, let's run that again. So now you notice that the catch executed. You see down here it says printed out console, something went wrong, or error, something went wrong. And that is because we didn't actually resolve anything from the promise, right? We just rejected. And so that's why it only did the catch. Same thing. You can have like a resolve and a reject happening in the same code, but the moment you call reject, then none of your then statements are going to be called. So if I run this again, it's the exact same logic. Typically how it happens is you'll do a request and like there'll be like a check to say if an error happened, return or reject, otherwise resolve or promise. But yeah, what else is there about promises? Promises are hard. Like this, it's hard to explain, and I kind of want to get through all the other questions as well. I can kind of come back and explain this more if that didn't help you. So let me know if this helped you at all, or if I just left you more confused than when you started. What is your favorite feature in JavaScript? Yeah, I think the spread operator is pretty useful, to be honest. I think proxies are really cool as well. Just the fact that you can use a proxy to kind of like wrap objects and do things when they change, like when their properties update. That's really, really powerful feature you can use to make your code like just be reactive. Yeah, what else is in JavaScript that I think is cool? I don't know. I think proxies might take the cake on that one. Use moment.js has functions for that. Yeah, I'm not sure what this was in response to, but moments.js is a date library that you can use to basically modify and manage time zones and dates. So if you're doing anything at all, like with a real life web application, you're going to be dealing with dates, and dates are really complex. They can be complex with like time zones, and then you're doing years, and you have like leap years and stuff like that. So yeah, this is a library that you can use for dates. Recursion, nice. Okay, I like doing recursion, so I might actually do this one. All right. Goodbye promises. Okay, so recursion is a more like higher level topic or a more complex topic when it comes to programming. All programming languages can typically invoke functions like we talked about. And recursion is a function that invokes itself, right? So the classic example is Fibonacci sequences. So let's say you have a function called fib. Let me take a step back. If no one knows what a Fibonacci sequence is, it's basically a sequence where you take the two last numbers and you add them together. So like you do a 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, etc. And the question is how do you generate these dynamically in code, right? So one solution is to use the Fibonacci sequence. And to kind of break that down into like the mathematical f of x, it basically boils down to this. So the Fibonacci sequence of your number. So if I wanted like the 8th Fibonacci sequence, it would be f of x minus 1 plus f of x minus 2, I believe. What am I doing? Okay. Bro, this keyboard. All right. Yeah, so you can use recursion to basically solve this. So to kind of give you, if you want to convert this to recursion, we need to make a function which takes in an x, and it needs to do something with that, okay? So to basically calculate the Fibonacci number of like the 5th term or the 10th term, you basically need to return the Fibonacci sequence of f minus 1 plus the Fibonacci sequence of x minus 2. Okay. Now typically, let me comment this out. So this right here is a recursive function. Okay, it's a function that calls itself. You see how we have fib inside of the function? So it basically keeps calling itself. And something cool that happens here, if I were to run this, this is probably going to crash my application. So if I run this, we get an error. It says maximum call stack size exceeded, and that's because the function keeps calling itself thousands of times until it eats up all of the memory on my, I guess my node runner or whatever you want to call it. So typically with a recursive function, you need to have some type of base case to tell it to stop executing itself over and over again. And what that base case typically is just for, at least for the Fibonacci sequence, is you can say if x is equal to 1 or x is equal to 2, or sorry, if x is equal to 0 or, I don't know if you want a 0, 1, or 1 and 2. Let's just do 1 and 2. So if you pass in 1, that's this number here. If you pass in 2, it's this number. If you pass in 3, it should be this number. So if I run this again and console log this, so that prints out 1. If I do fib of 2, that prints out 1. Fib of 3 prints out 2. Fib of 10 prints out 55. Let's see, I don't know if that's correct or not. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So fib of 6 should be 8. Okay. To take that a step further, you want to use a debugger to like kind of really understand what's going on with this stuff. Really helpful to use a debugger. So if I load up my debugger here, hopefully it works. All right. All right, this is getting serious now. We're getting the debugger out. So this is a great tool to kind of learn how to use coding or how to program and stuff. A debugger, you can put break statements over here. So I could like say, whenever we hit this line in our code, pause the execution and give me the ability to see like what stuff is equal to. So basically I put a breakpoint on line 7, which allows me to pause the program before it runs this line. And then I can tell it I need to step into that Fibonacci function. So here I think it's step into. No, that's step over. Step into F11. So that'll go into the function. And then I can kind of start inspecting stuff. So we're at x of 6. Okay, so it's going to run this and check, is x equal to 1 or 2? It's not, so I'm going to step over. And notice here that we can then dive into fib of x minus 1 and then fib of x minus 2. So if I click go into, we're going to get here again, 5, step over, go into it again. We keep going into it until we get to x of, if you look over here on the left, x of 2. And then we should return 1 here. So if I click that, notice that now it's highlighted over here of fib of this one. So this same process keeps happening. It keeps diving in fib recursively into different function calls. And then it calculates the Fibonacci sequence and then returns it back. I don't know if that was a good example of recursion or a good overview, but that's basically what it is. And you can use it to kind of solve a lot of different problems that are kind of recursive in nature, like dealing with objects. Typically, you want to do like recursive traversal over an object because an object can contain other objects. Let me just show you that real quick. Let me go to my terminal. All right. So let me know if that one made sense. That was too complex. But I did want to give a really quick overview of like an object. So an object can have, as you may know, can have objects nested in them, right? So a person can be an object that has a name. That could be an object that could have a I don't know, last name that could have an object as well. And you'll notice that this is kind of recursive in nature, right? You have an object that you could kind of traverse down recursively. And you could write a function to basically do that recursively. Let's just kind of write some pseudocode. I'm not going to write a real implementation for this. But let's say you wanted to have a function that took in an object and you wanted to print out every key that it found, okay? So what you could do is loop over every key of that object. So I could say like for let key in object, I believe is what you do. Okay, so loop over all the keys in the object, so that'll get person. And then you can say if the value of person, I think I say instance of object or something. I'd have to Google this, I'm not too sure. But then if you run into a property that is already an object, you want to call your function again with that new object you found. Wait, what did I do here? This needs to be key. Okay, so this code probably doesn't work, but notice that it's recursive in nature, right? We loop over all the keys of an object. If we happen to find a value that's an object, we then call the same function again, and we pass it that new object. So that'll basically recursively traverse this one. It's going to find person, and it's going to recursively traverse this one. It's going to find name. It's going to recursively traverse that one. And then last name, same thing. But you'll notice that this object had like hundreds of properties. It's going to recursively traverse all the different properties. And you can do stuff with that. You could like print out the names. You could print out the values, print out the keys, delete particular keys off of the object if you wanted to. Yeah, hopefully that was a good overview. You don't really use recursion that much in your day-to-day job. There's been like this project I've been working on for the past like 3 years. I think we used like recursion maybe twice. And it was kind of in the exact same example where we had an object and we need to loop through all the different keys and properties to find something specific. But you don't use it that often. Give me 1 second, y'all. All right. So that was some overview of recursion. Could you explain closures? I could try that. If there's anything else I'm missing. Someone says, will having a CS degree help you get a web dev job? I think it will. Will it help you become a better programmer? It can. But yeah, I think a lot of companies out there make sure that you have some type of bachelor's degree. And if you have a bachelor's degree in computer science already, I think that's a plus. A lot of people argue that it's not like necessary to get, but the honest truth is I think if people like hiring managers are looking at resumes and they see some person has no experience in a CS degree and another person has no experience and took a Udemy course, they're going to take the person with the CS degree. Because there's a lot of like complex topics that are taught in CS degree, such as recursion, such as data structure, such as algorithms, which really test your mind and make sure that you can problem solve. It's I don't know. It's a difficult topic to kind of talk about, but I think like from my personal experience, the fact that I had a degree helped me land a job months before I even graduated. Right, I had a job lined up before I even graduated, so I think it helped me. That again, that was in 2013, so times are changing. I don't know. Someone asked, or Marie asked, what do you think about Tailwind? It's okay. I don't know. I've used it. I personally just like using CSS or Sass or like style components, but it's just another tool, right? I don't like the way that it makes your HTML super long with class names, but It's not bad. There's trade-offs with everything. Like every CSS approach, there's like 10 different ways you can do CSS in React or in your application. But you're probably not talking about React here. You're just talking about in general. I think Tailwind, if you're a beginner, you don't want to waste too much time like learning how to use like Flexbox and CSS Grid. Tailwind is a great way to basically hit the ground running with styling your application with a lot of preset definitions that are easy to use. I won't talk bad about it, but I personally don't like using it because I already know a lot about CSS and I'm kind of used to working with uh, like CSS and Sass as it is. And to drop all that just to bring in Tailwind doesn't make sense to me. But that's just my experience. So I definitely recommend looking into it. Give it like a full week try. If you think it makes you more productive, then continue using it. I don't see any issue with actually learning it and using it if it helps you become better at writing CSS. All right, someone asked about closures. To be honest with you all, I might have to Google that. I'm pretty sure a closure is like... All right, let me... If I get this wrong, don't burn me at the stake. But I'm pretty sure a closure is like, let's say you have a loop, right? So I say const numbers is equal to 1, 2, 3. Okay. And I need to loop through all the numbers. So loop through all the numbers with the curly brace. And for every number, you want to run, I don't know, for example, some asynchronous code, right? So I could basically say set timeout. I could run a function here that's going to print out I. And I guess we don't really need to do anything else here. So if I run this, I hope this example is actually going to work. But from what I remember, if I run this, this should print out 3 for everything. No? Okay. I don't know what I'm talking about then. Let's see. There's like some... This is not a good example. I think I know what you're talking about. It's like basically where you need to like do like a self-executing function so that the... Oh, I know what it is. Here we go. Here we go. All right, so it's because I was using let, and the let keyword has different scoping for blocks than var. So again, correct me, Nathan, if I'm wrong on this, if this is like not what you're asking, but a closure is basically a way to fix this issue. Okay, so if you notice I run this, it prints out 3 for everything. But you'd think that, okay, I should have been 1, 2, and 3, and it should have printed out 1, 2, and 3. But the issue is that this set timeout basically gets pushed into the event loop and it's run at a later time. And I believe that by the time it does execute, I has already been incremented to 3, and this for loop is like done. So when it comes to printing out the value of I, it happens to print out 3 different times, right? So a closure is a way to wrap that so that this doesn't happen, right? So a quick way to do this is you can make a function here that takes in a value of I. I could just do like X. Might be a completely terrible way to explain this. So you make a function, you basically wrap your logic with a function that takes in a new value, and I can call this here. So I could say pass in I down here. Okay, so now when I run this, it still prints out the wrong thing because I need to console log X. Okay. All right, so notice that now it prints out 1, 2, 3 because every time that this set timeout runs down the road, because this isn't going to run exactly the moment that you think it does, it's actually looking up the value of X, which happens to be locked in to whatever I was at that time. Guess you can't do that. Okay. Is that what a closure is? I might have just explained something not called a closure. Because Consider the following code example. Running this code exactly the same effect as the previous init. See? Not everyone knows everything. I have to go back and remind myself what the heck a closure is. I believe it's related to scope. This guy's really good. Eric Elliott, this guy's like a genius when it comes to JavaScript. He has so much stuff he posts out there. I think I probably explained the wrong thing. I think I explained like a self-executing function, like JavaScript. I think it's called like an IFFE or something. Immediately evoked functional expression. I think I kind of explained something else that's not really a closure. I think what a closure is like a function that declares another function inside of it. I need to make a note to go back and actually make sure I understand this. So if I have a function here, I'll like, oh, my O key popped off again. Give me a second. So function fun takes in an X and I don't understand like what closure is a feature in JavaScript where the inner function has access to the outer enclosing. Okay, yeah, okay. So I probably just confused all you all and just gave you some bad information, but I think what I showed you was an example of using a closure to basically lock down the variables in a certain scope. But I believe a closure is like you can use a function inside of another function to use the values. So like if I had a function here, I can print out X here, I believe. Right, so if I do like a console log, if I just run X or fun of 5, poke for other. All right, so that's going to print out X of 5. And I believe this is what a closure is. It's basically, since we declared a function inside of another function, it's going to have access to everything that's at a higher level of itself, right? So this function can access the X, but this one, like if I were to declare something in here that's like var of y is equal to hello, and try to print out y, it's going to crash because y is not defined, I believe. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is what a closure actually is. It's just like a function that you declare inside of other functions so that you can basically access the higher level scope of whatever the top level parent function was, right? So this function, the fun is closed over the other function, okay? So this is like the closure. Everything that other has access to would be anything inside of these curly braces. And I think I just slaughtered this whole explanation, so you can give me a dislike for that one. But if this helped you at all, let me know. I need to go back and actually reread exactly what a closure is. But he says a closure is a feature in JavaScript where an inner function, which would be this, has access to the outer enclosing function's variables, which would be this. Okay, and you can kind of keep going down. Like I could make another function inside of here, and then that would have access to y. I could print out like y here. As long as you invoke it, like make sure you invoke this somewhere. Okay. Oh, I should probably name it something else, right? So I'll make a function called t and give you the most confusing code that you've ever seen. And then it gets here. So this printing out y, this should also have access to x as well. So I should be able to do a comma and print out x because the t function is closed over other, which is closed over this. So this should have access to every variable that's declared inside of the parent functions that has been wrapping it. So notice here we console logged the y, which is hello, and then also x, which happens to be 5. And I'm going to stop there before I confuse anyone else with my lack of remembering what a closure actually is. All right. Let's see. Yeah, Nathan, let me know if I just confused you or if that actually helped, or if I explained it wrong. I think I just taught two different things by answering one question. Yeah, so I think I answered this question hopefully a long time ago. Could you explain bind? Having a bit trouble understanding this concept. Yeah, give me a second. Let me scroll down to the bottom. Async await. Yeah, so good. I explained it correctly, I think. There's been two people ask about async await. Prototypical inheritance is a total mystery to me. When should you use arrow functions? Man, these are all good questions. Y'all are asking really good questions, y'all. So good job. Just to be fair, I'll need to keep this in order, but I don't know how much longer I'll have time to stream before my kids wake up, so... Alright, where was I? Someone asked about... Where was that question? Okay, I helped him with promises. He asked what proxies are. Where is that question? I missed it, y'all. Oh, here it is. Bind. Whew. This one's kind of confusing. So, I'll probably have to Google this one too, because I don't really use bind and this that much. So there's a keyword in JavaScript called this, which is basically it's a reference to whatever the function was defined in. So if I make a function called object and let me say dog. I'll make an object called dog. I'll give it a function called bark, and it's going to console log this dot voice. Oh, my O key popped off again. 1 second. Okay, so let's give it voice of woof woof. Dog.bark. All right, so again, we have an object, so you need to understand what objects are in JavaScript. And if I run this code correctly, it prints out woof woof. Okay, so this is basically a keyword you can use to access the object or the thing that the function you invoked is a part of. Okay, it's really confusing. But since this function belongs to this object, this refers to basically this object. Okay. That is the best way I can think of it and explain it, but this can get really confusing. Like if I were to do a fat arrow here, this is no longer going to print out bark bark, it prints out undefined, because in this case, the fat arrow is doing like an apply or a bind behind the scenes and kind of setting this equal to the current scope of when you invoked, you created the object. So just to show you, this is referring to the global window at this point, because that is what's above this, due to closures we just kind of talked about. So if I were to say this of, I think actually if I said window or global dot, dude, I need to fix my keyboard. Okay, global dot voice is equal to woof woof exclamation mark. And now I run this. That doesn't work either, because what is actually this referring to? There's probably something going on with how Node works, but if I were to print out this, I think it's going to be something else. Prints out an object. I promise y'all, I know JavaScript. I'll have to go and refresh my memory about this, but the fat arrow basically changes the reference of this, which is why it's not printing out woof woof anymore. I believe this should reference, not it's going to reference something else, but I don't know. Maybe if I wrap this in a function or something. I'll just wrap this in a self-executing function and see what happens. All right, let me just undo all this before I confuse you all and Okay, so did that at least make sense of where did that go? All right, let me go back to a function here. All right, so the answer, the question I'm trying to answer is bind. So I think bind, what you can do is you can basically change what this is referenced to. So if I wanted to instead like overwrite what bark is, like I think I say like dog dot. I'm about to Google this. I don't know the answers. I'll be honest with you all. Bind will make a new function. So like, I think I could make like a new bark and say dog dot bark dot bind, and I could pass it a different this, like I'll say like voices meow, and then if I call new bark, is this actually what works? Okay, I think that's what it's doing. So basically, bind, you take a function, you call dot bind on it, and you can pass it a new reference to what this should actually refer to. Okay, so this in this case would refer to voice of meow, right? We're basically overriding what this would refer to in that other example, because you remember this would have referred to the actual object the method was defined on. But now that we're using bind, it kind of overwrites what this refers to. And notice that when I run this, it prints out meow. I don't know if I explained that correctly or well, but there's also some other methods. I think there's also like if you wanted to do dog of bark, and I wanted to say, is it call or apply? I think it's call, and then you can pass it the same thing. So I could say voice of like meow. So if I run that, that does something really similar. Basically, it calls the bark function on the dog, but it overwrites what this refers to with a new value. Um, Again, you don't use this that often. Like, I don't think I've ever used bind or call or apply in the last 2 or 3 years on my full stack application. This is like, I can't really think of good examples of when you want to use this because most of the times with the fat arrow, like there's no need to actually do this stuff. And if you are doing this stuff, it's probably something like really intricate and complex that there's a small reason why you need it. Or maybe you're working with an older library or framework such as like Backbone.js, where you're doing a lot of lower level JavaScript. But if you're doing like Vue or React, you don't usually have to use the bind. Um, Unless you're using like the old style of React where you had to use classes, and then like in the constructor you had to do like the method dot bind this or something. I don't know, but let me know if I just confused you. I was living. Let's see. I know that when you invoke this outside of the object, then it refers to the window object. Yeah, I thought that's what it's supposed to do, but I just tried it out. Maybe it's because I'm using Node and not the actual like browser, but it was crashing when I tried to do that. So, but I think you're right. Like if you were to um if I did a fat arrow here, it should have access to window.voice. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe, let's just test that out real quick. Just do this. Let's go here, paste that in. We are going to change this to a fat arrow, and we're going to figure out what voice is going to do. Dog a bark. If I run this, npx, I'm just going to host a server locally, and we are going to look at what happens. All right, so this is printing out undefined, but I think if I do window.voice of like meow. Okay, notice there. This is, oh yeah, so this is what I was talking about. With the fat arrow, it doesn't work in Node because it works differently, I guess. If anyone knows, let me know. But in the browser, because I made this a fat arrow, this is actually going to refer to the top level scope or closure. Okay, so this is actually going to refer to the global window object. which if you imagine everything inside the script tag, I guess is technically scoped to the window. I think I can actually show that if I print out this here. Probably going to have like an object that has a ton of different methods on it. Yeah, it prints out window here. So the fat arrow basically takes whatever value of this is in your parent and uses that. Okay, so I think someone asked what the fat arrow does. And this whole combination of like this whole voice meow bark example, I think kind of explains that. So if you don't have the fat arrow, this is going to refer to the voice inside of the object that we defined here. If you do use the fat arrow, it's going to change what this refers to. And in this particular example, it's going to refer to the window. Now, it's not always going to be the window. Like if I think if I had this in a function, like so, and I invoked it like this, let's call it test. All right, let's just that. What is this actually going to be? Okay, I guess if you have it, here's a good example of bind again. So if I were to call this instead and pass it like a voice of what is up, notice that when you call test and you pass it a new reference to what this should be, because this is declared inside of the test, this is actually going to equal whatever this was. Okay. But then the fat arrow is telling everything inside of the brackets here that this should refer to whatever this was a test, which happens to be overwritten because we did a call here. It's just hella confusing. And if, in my opinion, if you are working with code bases that have a lot of use of the this keyword, I would recommend that you try to get out of that code base. Like, because I personally don't like using classes in JavaScript and object-oriented programming in JavaScript just because that this keyword is so confusing that I've seen people with like 5-10 years of experience spend 20 minutes trying to understand what this is equal to and why it's equal to that. Because this keyword is so it's a brain teaser. It's hard to wrap your mind around it. So just keep that in mind, but I don't know if I explain all that stuff good, so yep. All right, so hopefully I covered that topic. Let's see how long I've been streaming for. 1 hour and 18 minutes. All right. What else did I miss? Can you explain error handling timeout? Okay, so I'm not going to do an in-depth explanation on data structures because that is like that's way over the scope of this stream. I'm trying to focus on the simple things that I can maybe answer in like a couple of minutes, but to talk about linked lists and arrays and all that other stuff, that's going to take a lot more time. So sorry, but if I make another stream, maybe I can cover that in the future. I doubt if this person's still watching. Okay, what else is there? Can you explain error handling and set timeout? I'm not sure I understand this question. Error handling. I think, okay, so set timeout is an asynchronous function, right? So I think what he's saying is like, if you were to throw an exception here, there's no way to know, there's no way to catch the error. So like if I were to wrap this in a try catch, I don't think this will work. Let me print this out real quick. Yeah. So because set timeout is going to be pushed onto the event loop and executed at a later time, the only way to kind of catch errors that might happen is you'd have to put the try catch inside of it. All right, so you'd have to basically do this, and that will catch your error. Notice here I print out ERR. So I think that's the only way you can do it because this is going to be executed at a later point, and there's no try catch that you can do to wrap it. So whatever logic that you do inside of this set timeout, you got to wrap it in a try catch. You got to catch your error there, and then you got to do whatever you need to do to like process that error inside of your catch statement. I think that's what he's asking. Hopefully that explained it. But yeah, hopefully you understand why you can't just wrap the entire thing in a try catch, right? You have to actually put the try catch inside of your brackets here, um, because this is going to be executed later. All right, where did you learn React? I learned React basically on the job. I was working with Angular on my last project, and then I switched over to a React job, and basically just read the React docs. That's I just read a lot of the React docs, and just worked with other people who knew more about it, and just kind of followed the examples they did in the code base. Okay, so I didn't like sit down and watch a Udemy course or watch YouTube tutorials about it. Maybe on certain concepts I might have, but for the most part, React, if you learn like functional components, use state, use effect, and then also whatever state management library you're using, you're pretty much good to go. Also, use ref is important to know as well. But yeah, for most libraries and frameworks, like I know it takes a little bit of dedication to kind of just go to the docs, but you really just need to go to the docs. Like, go read the React docs. If you want to learn React, you don't need to watch 100 tutorial videos. Just go start reading through this. It might be really dense. Usually they have like a getting started guide. I'll be honest, the React docs suck and compared to like Vue. Like these docs are like great. Like you can read through these and actually understand what's going on. React is just a mess in my opinion, but I would go through those main concepts, just read through these one by one, try to understand how it works, try not to get too confused by the advanced stuff that they're talking about with like re-renders and renders and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I think if you just take it slow and just take it one page at a time, you should be able to learn React. It's really just boils down to like JSX, um, again, some hooks if you're using functional React, and really that's about it. So it looks more daunting than I think it really is. All right. I'm going to create a slider with vanilla JS, and it's kind of difficult how I can make it as simple as possible. Slider. Yeah, this I don't know if I can answer this question because there's a lot of things that can go into like a slider. Um, Typically you have like a horizontal bar. Whoops. For a slider, you have like a horizontal bar, right? And you usually have like a um, circle, and that circle is clickable and it's also draggable. And you probably want to lock it into the Y, like a Y axis. Okay, so you can't like drag it up and down. You can only drag it for like a fixed Y of like 300, so it stays in the same Y axis. And then as you drag it, when you let go, you basically need to check how much did it move in the X direction and maybe do some type of like math to figure out far left equals like 0, far right equals 1. And if you dragged it like 3/4 of the way, how do you figure out that it's 0.75? All right, what else is there? Can you quickly explain async await? I think I could. Give me 1 second. All right, sorry y'all. I was talking to my wife. I wanted her to let me know when the kids wake up because I'm gonna drop when the kids are awake. Or before that. Okay, so someone asked if I could do async await. So before I explain async await, you need to understand promises. So make sure you understand promises really well, like how to write a promise, how to do a dot then statement on it, how to do a dot catch, how promise chaining works, how the resolve function works, how reject function works. And once you understand all that, I think you can go into async await. So async await is a helper to basically take your promises and put them more inline in a sense. So let's just make a quick promise. Let's just make a function called main. Function main. And that is going to basically call another function. So I'll make a function called main and a function called do stuff. Again, what we're trying to talk about is async await. So what we need to do is have do stuff, do something. So I'll make it do a setTimeout. And do stuff is going to return a new promise. So I'm going to say return new promise. That is going to take a callback function, and that is going to invoke setTimeout, which is going to resolve hello. So right here off the bat, if you don't understand this stuff, then you need to go and learn about promises. You need to learn about callbacks, setTimeout. Like this is some complex stuff if you're a beginner, in my opinion. But what async await lets us do is traditionally, if you wanted to run this, okay, we could basically inside of this function, we can call do stuff. We can say then, and then we can console log whatever that do stuff function returned. Okay, so if I run this, oh, my head's blocking, but you'll notice that it prints out hello. Okay, so it took about 2 seconds. I run it, wait 2 seconds, and it prints out hello. So what async await allows us to do, instead of having to do promise chaining, we can just put an async in front of the function, and we can say const result is equal to await of do stuff. Right, and then we can just console log result here, which is going to hopefully be hello. So if I run this, pull that up. Notice that after 2 seconds, it printed out hello again. Okay, so that's all async await does, right? It's just syntactic sugar on top of promises. And when you add the async keyword in front of a function, that basically means that that function is going to return a promise. Okay, even though this doesn't have a return statement here, right? There's no return. If I were to print out what main is, I'm pretty sure this is going to print out promise. So let's run this. Notice there, it prints out promise. So all the async keyword does is basically take whatever's returned from your function, wraps it in a resolve promise. And then it also gives us the ability to wrap stuff in a try catch. So the error handling is a little bit easier. Like if you know anything about try catches, you could simply wrap this in a try catch. Let me move that up. Delete some of this stuff. All right. All right, so now if I run this, for 2 seconds, it should print out hello. But if I were to instead have rejected an error, I'll just reject a string like that. And I'm going to put reject here. So if I run this now, notice that it prints out the error, which is this. We got an error. Rerun that. Okay, so that's basically async await. Like you need to understand promises really well. And when you do, async await is like super trivial. It's just async basically makes your function return a promise. Await is basically taking the result of your promise and returning it. So this is like, await is kind of like wrapping a promise inside of a normal function and just returning the results here. And then it also allows you to use a try catch because it's also just like treating this like a normal function in a sense. And if that normal function throws an error, then you can catch it and do something with it. Or in this case, that function is a promise that would reject an error. So you're still watching. I hope that kind of answered your question about async await. I think we've got 2 questions about that. So Rush asked it, and Lucas, probably pronounced your name wrong, so I apologize. So hopefully that helped you out. Oh man, there's a lot of questions. Prototypical inheritance. When should you use an arrow function versus the normal function syntax? I'll probably come back to this one in a second. I'm just gonna see if there's any like low-hanging questions I can answer real quick. So this one's hard to answer, honestly. I think I typically use the arrow function as much as possible, unless I know for some reason I need to access this keyword. If you know you need to access this keyword, then you need to like start thinking about, okay, maybe I shouldn't use an arrow function. I should probably use like a normal function. And that really boils down to like classes and objects. Like if you have a class of person that has a method of like run or something, I don't know if this is a good example because you can't use fat arrows here. Let me think about something else. Let me do a inline object. So if you have a person that has a run function, and you also have like a speed here of like 100. Okay, this is an example when you don't want to use a fat arrow because this is going to mess up what this refers to. If for some reason you have functionality that needs to access property on the object itself, then you need to just do a normal function like so that I can actually print out the speed here. Okay. That is basically in my mind, the only reason you want to use the old style of functions is if you know you need to access this, then you need to understand how functions work with this versus fat arrow functions. And you can kind of do this as well. The main advantages of using fat arrows is it's just less code, right? I think that's really the only advantage. This is less code than writing out function. I think you get the picture, but my O key just popped off again, so I'll have to fix this. Someone could probably argue that there's more like advantages and disadvantages and when you should use it, but in my opinion, I would just use the fat arrow whenever you can, unless you know that you need to access this keyword. And that's when you need to start making sure you understand what you know about functions versus normal functions. And by the way, if you joined late, I just talked like 10 minutes about what this refers to. So maybe rewind and watch back. I know that when we invoke this outside of an object, then it refers to the window. Yep, so we covered this. Man, we are so far behind in this chat. Promises. I covered promises already. So I hope that helps you all learn it. Hello, pal. I was working in a login sign up form. Could you explain with Axios? I'm not going to dive in. Axios in React. Okay. Do I want to explain this? I didn't want to get into details of React and Vue, to be honest, but let's say I'll just do like some pseudocode. So this code's not going to work exactly the way you think it should, but let's say you have Axios and you wanted to do a get on an endpoint. I think this is how you do it. So let's say you wanted to access google.com, and I think by default Axios does promises, right? But your question is, how do you do await async with Axios in React? I think the React part of the question is not important. Like that has nothing to do with having a good understanding of how promises and async await works. But again, kind of like we just talked about with promises and async await, this method returns a promise, okay? So the resolved value of that promise is going to have something, right? So I could do a dot then, and I think this should have some type of response in it. So if I were to do the console log that out, it should print out like my status codes, my font's body, stuff like that. But when it comes to async await, you literally just need to have a function that has an async keyword in front of it. You could do a fat arrow or you could do a normal function. And you need to basically do stuff. When this function is invoked, instead of doing the promise chaining here, you would basically just do like a results is equal to a weight of that. Okay, and then you can print out the results. So I covered this already. This is more specific, but again, like if you take a step back, if you don't worry about React, you don't worry about Axios, and you just think about promises, what are promises, how do they work, then it doesn't matter if this is Axios, this doesn't matter if this is like fetch or whatever, I don't know, HTTP request library that's out there. All you need to know about is that this is a promise that's pending and that you can await on it to get back the results. That's really all you need to know about. But this is how I think you would do it in React. You probably have a function, you invoked it, you get the results back, you do something with it. You could probably set it on state if you wanted to, like that, something like that. If you had like a state variable, if this was a React functional component, let me just, we're going crazy right here. I think async await might be different in React. Maybe that's why you're asking. But I think you just do this. Like if you have an on-click, you have a div, you click it, it's going to run some asynchronous code. I might be off though. You might not be able to do this in React, which is probably why you're asking. Can you do that? If not, what you probably have to do is you have to like do some type of self-executing function here and put your stuff inside of that. Let's see. I think I could do this. All right, so I have to go back and refresh my memory with React. I don't remember if you can do like async await out of the box. I think it's with effects you can't do it, but I think you should be able to do it with click events. But if you're doing like an effect or something like that, you might have to like do a self-executing function where you define an internal async await function where you can await on stuff, and then you call it. But I think if I go back, I'm pretty sure you can do this in React where you can just call a function and await on it inside of it, but I could be wrong. Let me know. Give me 1 second. My nose is running. It's a little cold in this room. All right. So I don't know if I explained that correctly. How can we avoid mess about multiple events? Hey pal, I was working in a login sign up form. How can we avoid mess about multiple events? I apologize. I'm not really sure what you're asking here. Let me try to look how control order execution, validate state object, etc. In a login form, we have events like input, focus, out, changes, and inside each we have an example email tag, the validity state object, and properties like type mismatch. Yeah, I don't know. This question that you're asking, it sounds a little complex for a stream about JavaScript. It looks like you're actually talking about like HTML forms and stuff like that. And a bunch of other stuff that I really don't, I need more context. Like you'd have to send me a GitHub repo and I have to pull your code, I have to run it to figure out what you're talking about. So unfortunately, I'm not going to address your question, Dark Soldier, just because I think it's out of the scope of what this stream is for. This stream is just to help people with really basic concepts like promises, async await, spread operator, etc. If you're here and you're asking, like, for anyone who's actually watching the stream still, if you're asking questions about like React and stuff like that, that's kind of out of the scope of what we're trying to do here. Even HTML, like I don't even want to touch HTML files in this stream if I don't have to. So I apologize about that. So someone asked, need clarity on closures in JavaScript. So we did talk about closures earlier. I don't think I did the best job at doing it, but it's just a function that basically you define another function inside that function, and that function has access to variables inside. I would just say rewind the video, find the section where I talked about closures, and I hope that can kind of explain what you need to, what you're confused about. I don't even know what this validity state object is. I've never used that before. Let me close some of this stuff. Is that a real thing? Validity state. I'll be honest, I never used this before, so I probably couldn't even answer your question to begin with. But I mean, a form it should be pretty simple, right? You have a form that has inputs. You click sign up or sign in if they're missing email or they're missing something. Then you just apply some style to your inputs to make it, to give some feedback to the user to say like, hey, you entered this wrong. So when you talk about order of execution, I'm not really sure what that even means. Because typically you just highlight all the fields that are bad. But I don't know, maybe there's something I'm missing. Yeah, no problem. Lomesh, how do you pronounce it? Lomesh. Hope this stream is helping some people. Fire cut clips. Do we have to be experts in JavaScript in order to learn React? No, you don't have to be an expert in JavaScript, but you need to know the basics. And when I say the basics, promises, everything I've been talking about, promises, async await, spread operator, recursive function. Well, maybe not recursion. I'll take that back. Yeah, it depends on what you define as an expert, right? If you think async await and like handling ES6 classes and this keyword and a lot of other stuff is expert topics, then yes, you need to be an expert in JavaScript. I think those are like the bare minimum. Like async await is like the fundamentals of JavaScript, which you need to know before you touch React. You need to know about self-executing functions. You need to know about callbacks. You probably need to know about modules. So ES6 modules, import, export. Higher order components is probably a thing you should kind of learn about. Functions inside of functions, closures. So I don't know. It's hard to say if you need to be an expert, but a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, if you don't know it and then you try to start learning React, the moment someone uses something that you haven't seen before, like the spread operator, or maybe they use like the bind call in their ES6 class, you're going to be scratching your head being like, I don't know what that is. And the reason you don't know what it is because you haven't learned JavaScript well enough to really know what they're doing. So I would say yes, you should know, you should be pretty well versed in JavaScript before you dive into React.js. But that's just my opinion. But I know there's people who try to jump into React.js and they're stumbling around because they have no idea how JavaScript really works. So keep that in mind. What do you think about the Tab9 VS Code extension? I haven't used it. I keep seeing ads for it. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't used it. So what do you think about it? That's the real question. Do you think it actually helps? For the most part, like the IntelliSense with VS Code seems to do exactly what I want. Like you see there, I type set, fourth one down, set state. I don't know how much more help I need to be able to like type in set state, but I haven't really watched more about what tab9 gives you or what it can actually autocomplete. Yeah, I have to look into that. So Lomesh asks, best resources to learn JavaScript. I mean, honestly, like this is people don't like this site, but literally you go to this site right here and you'll walk through the entire course. It's free. You don't have to sit there and watch a video. You literally just walk through it and it teaches you a lot about JavaScript. Free code camp as well. Check that out. Like, this is a great resource. They have a bunch of things that can help you, like, walk you through learning JavaScript and stuff. I haven't used this site in a long time, so I'm not going to log in and all that. But yeah, check out Free Code Camp. The thing is, to answer that question, best resources, I think a lot of people will like jump around. Like they'll go to Udemy and buy a JavaScript course and they don't finish it. Or they'll go to a website like one of the ones I just showed. They'll do the first 5 parts of the tutorial and they don't finish it. And then they jump into something else. I think find one of those resources because they're all basically the same thing. Like how many different ways can you teach how to do a for loop? How many different ways can you teach promises? It's really a basic concept that everyone is teaching almost the exact same way. I mean, maybe some people throw some extra flair on it, but at the end of the day, it's the same concept. It doesn't change. So it doesn't really matter what resource you find, as long as you actually sit down and finish the entire course or finish the entire walkthrough, and then apply those things that you learned by building something from yourself, right? So as an example, if you're going through like Free Code Camp and they talk about if statements, right? You can't just watch them talk about if statements or read them talk about if statements. You actually have to go to your console and be like, well, let's just pretend like I had a weather app and the degrees is like 80 degrees right now. Let's pretend like if the degrees is greater than or less than 90, let's say I wanted to like, I don't know, wear a jacket, right? You have to play around with the stuff that you learn and then go into your terminal and like actually run the code. Oops. Right? We a jacket. I could actually write proper English here. All right, so the point I'm getting at is like as you're going through these courses and tutorials, like at every step along the way, if they teach about conditional logic or if statements, you should be spending like 30 minutes just playing around with if statements. You shouldn't go on to the next topic until you actually understand what the heck they just taught you. So you need to apply that knowledge so that it really sticks. Like there's a 1,000 things you can do with if statements, right? You could do less than, greater than equal to, less than or equal to. Like what does the not operator mean? You're dealing with like Boolean logic. You could ampersand stuff together. You do like ors. So the point I'm making is like there's so much that goes into just a single concept of conditional logic in Boolean expressions that if you don't actually play around with all the different ways you can use it in like I don't know else statements and else if and stuff like that, you're gonna get into more advanced topics and they're just gonna breeze over if statements and you're gonna be lost because you didn't take the time to really learn the stuff. So that was just a long rant of saying there is no best resource. Just find something, stick to it from start to finish, and apply the things that they're teaching to you along the way with building your own things and just experiment with whatever you're learning. How do you properly update state in a use effect hook? Sometimes the state is one step behind. I'm not sure I follow this one. I think I kind of know what you're talking about in React. But what you might need to do, it really depends on what you're doing. There's so much that can go wrong in React and state. Like maybe you're not passing a new reference to your object. But usually in use state, there is a way to basically get the current value. And you can do something with it here. So whatever I think, not use state, I'm sorry. Let me start over. So in React, let's say you had some state and you had a set state method. Okay, so sometimes in React, I don't know if you're in a hook or something or in an effect, sometimes you need to get like the current value here and you need to do something with it. So I know current value is, oops, is negated. Sometimes you might have to do something like that inside your effect to get it to actually grab the latest version of state. And this is most common if you were to go like here inside, let's say you had like a use effect hook. Something like this. I'm just pseudocoding right now, but if you like were to set state and call it true, and then down here you said like if state is true, do something, this is not going to work because this doesn't update until React re-renders the component. Okay, so usually what you got to do is you got to like pull out. I would pull out a constant, say new state is equal to like the toggle of that. And then you can still say set state true, but then anywhere we're trying to do more logic on the old value of state, you just need to make sure that your or not the old value of state, but like your new value of state, you kind of just need to do that. I don't know if this is the issue you're running into, but I have run into issues where like you're trying to access state, but it's not updated because React hasn't re-rendered yet. So I hope that kind of helps. There's a lot of stuff that go wrong. If you're dealing with objects or arrays, you could be passing the state incorrectly into your set state function. But yeah, React is not related to this stream, so I'm going to stop talking about that now. Are you planning to make a video on promises? Maybe something with real-world applications like APIs. What is SMTH? Oh, something? Maybe my lingo is not the best. All right, so I think you meant something there. I could try to make a more dedicated video to promises. I've gotten like 3 or 4 people asking about promises and async await, so I think it's one of those like most confusing topics of JavaScript, but it's also like one of the most important topics to understand. So yeah, I could probably make a video on it if you all are interested in learning more about promises. I did already talk about, if you're new, well, you're not new, I think you're here when I'm talking about it, but yeah, I talked about promises already in the stream, so maybe rewind and find that part. Good luck finding it. I'm sure it's there somewhere. All right, I think this person is talking about tab 9 and they're saying use Kiwi instead. Again, I don't see the true benefit of using those just because I haven't used it myself. But tab 9, what is Kiwi? Is that an extension? I don't know what that is, but yeah. You can just leave a comment on this video when I publish it and let me know if tab 9 helps you. But I haven't used it, and all right, let's see what else there is. How do you properly update state in a use effect hook? Sometimes the state is one step behind. Oh, didn't I just answer that one? I think I did. What is Elasticsearch? So again, this stream is about JavaScript. So if you have like JavaScript questions that you're lost on or you need help with JavaScript, I would recommend that you ask those questions. But I mean, I'll try to answer some of these like short ones. Elasticsearch is basically another like database. I think it's called like a reverse index. What is it called? Reverse index store Elasticsearch. Inverted index. That's what it is. That's just another way to like you basically can store all your data there and you can easily query on that data. So if you have like, let's say your data is a ton of documents. And when I say documents, I mean like JSON objects that have like text in them. So let's say, okay, let me take a step back. Let's say you're building like an application that stores thousands of books, okay? And you want to store the actual full text of all those books. And you want to give the user the ability to query any of those books for a particular sentence that exists inside the text, right? So if, let's say you have like, you have Moby Dick, you have A Tale of Two Cities, you have all these huge collections of books and you want people to be able to find very specific sentences in those books. Elasticsearch might be a good use case for that because it's really quick to query large collections of text to find specific keywords or specific phrases. And you can imagine trying to do that in SQL would probably crash your SQL server because you can't store, I don't know, 500,000 words in a SQL database and have people doing queries over those efficiently. Okay, so that is what you might want to use Elasticsearch for. It's basically you take a document and then other parts of your application can query on it based off the values of the document, which is why I think it's called like a reverse. Reverse index, reverse something. Inverted index. Inverted. Let me Google this. Inverted. Yeah, it's called inverted index. So usually like if you have data, you have like a primary key. So that's like a normal like index, primary key, and then you get the value of that. Elasticsearch reverts or inverts that, right? So you have your value and you want to get the primary key. So you can search books for phrases and get back the primary key that is associated with that phrase. Hope that wasn't too confusing. I've already did async await here, so go back and rewatch the entire hour-and-a-half stream. And also give me a thumbs up. Okay, so yeah, no problem. You're welcome for the live. Rakan Khan says, I have a question, please, if you let me. How do you make a draggable object, then you get the position and store it in the DB? How do you make a draggable object? I'm going to go through, okay, there's not that many questions left here, so let me just see if there's any JavaScript questions. How do you go by breaking down and understanding a pre-existing code base that you're looking to work on? You open a project and there's folders everywhere. What do you look for to understand it? This is a good question. Second. um, I think it really depends on the type of project, right? So if you're dealing with an API, let me rephrase that. Well, yeah, let's just look at a small example, right? So let's say you open up a GitHub project, and this GitHub project is just for the REST API for your service or whatever. What I typically do is I try to find the router. Typically, there's always a router for your API, which is like a top level file that tells you all of your REST endpoints and what controllers they might invoke. Okay, I would start there. There's always like a top level place you can start with all your applications that the code basically starts from, right? The main function. In the backend API, usually it's like an app.js or server.js. Um, Typically, if you're using like in a more advanced framework, like I don't know, Laravel or Django or something, that might not always be the case because a lot of that stuff, there's a lot of magic behind the scenes, and you might actually have to go and start with reading through the documentation, right? So if you're opening up a Django project, I would say don't start with looking through the code. Read through the Django documentation, understand how the project is set up, where your routes are defined, where your controllers are defined, where your models are defined, how do they all connect together, um, where the migration scripts are, and start from there and then look at the code base so that you can actually kind of map back to like, oh, I just read that in the docs. That makes sense why there's a controllers folder. Or, oh, that makes sense why there's a models folder. You know what I'm saying? Now, if you're dealing with like some hacked together node API, which is probably more often than not, if it's a node API, it's just some hacked together mess. But yeah, usually there's like a top level main function, like your app.js or your server.js. Start there, find your router, dive through some of the code. Um, Now, to kind of answer this for React, again, let's say you open up a project on GitHub and it's a React UI. Again, usually there's like a top level React component, which again defines all your routes, defines like, I don't know, like where all the different pages are defined and how you can get to them. And then you can slowly start diving through the components and like kind of looking through those. Um, it's really about knowing like what you're looking for. Like if React and Vue, typically you just have like a bunch of like you have page components and then you have like shared components, right? And you just kind of just have to go through all those components and understand what's going on. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but it really depends on the project and what you're looking at. And if you're looking at a Git repo that they've combined the UI and the backend and all these other scripts together, you kind of just have to start the top level and just kind of expand the folders and like understand like what is the purpose of this folder? What is in this folder? Is this folder have I don't know, it's just for like the REST API. Is a folder called docs, and it probably just has a bunch of like MD files that explain your application. Yeah. I don't know. This is a hard question to answer because every project's so much different. But usually there's like a README that it should explain at least some of it, hopefully. But that's not always the case. But yeah, this one I don't think I'm going to answer this one just yet because this is a super complex question, and I'm just answering JavaScript questions right now. But since the questions have kind of stopped coming in, I mean, I have 24 viewers right now, but all right, can you show examples of destructuring? All right, this is a good JavaScript question. So these are the type of questions I'm looking for. So destructuring in JavaScript is typically if you have an object, again, like we have an object that has a name property of Bob and an age of 10. Let us say we wanted to get back just the age, okay? So what you can do in JavaScript is you can do something called destructuring, and I can say make a variable called age, and I'm going to wrap it in curly braces and set it equal to the object. Okay, so now what that's going to do is basically take the name out of that object and put it here. If I run this, I think this should do something at least. Okay. All right, so that is how you do destructuring. It's as simple as that. You basically have an object on the right side of your equals, and on the left side, you can pull out whatever properties that you want. So let's say there's a little bit more. Let's say last name is Rex. Location is Nashville. Okay, so you can also pull out some other things. So let's say you just wanted location and name. Well, you can pull those out like so, and you can print them out if you want to. Does that make sense? And then also like, this is just an object, but this could be whatever expression happens to return an object, right? I could have called a function here called like do stuff. And if that returns an object, then I could destructure stuff out of that and just kind of access that. You'll see this a lot with imports. So is it with imports? I think it's with imports. So like with ES6 modules, you typically could say like import, I don't know, I'll say fun from my function module or something. So you can basically destructure or pull out the individual functions or exported variables from a file or module and use it here. So you probably see, I don't know if this is actually called destructuring, it might be something else, but it's a very similar syntax. You can also do this with arrays, okay? So this is just with objects. Before I switch to arrays though, let me show you the rest. So let's say you wanted to put the remainder, so age and last name in their own object. I could say like ... remaining, I guess. And if I were to print out remaining here, print that out. Notice that remaining has the properties that we did not put here. Okay, so it's going to pull out name, going to pull out location, and then whatever we didn't pull out is going to be put into another object. Okay, so this is called like the rest operator, I believe. The ... is also used for the spread operator as well. It's kind of confusing, but I would go read up on the spread operator if this is confusing. But yeah, the original question was, can you show examples of destructuring? So that is how you do it for objects, but you can also do it for arrays, okay? So let's say we had an array of people, and those are like Bob, John, and Rex, okay? So you can destructure the indexes from that array and put them in variables. So I could say like first, second, and third, and set that equal to a people, okay? Let me run this real quick. Notice that we basically were defining new variables for first, second, and third, but we are taking the values and initializing them to the first, or I should say 0th index, the first index, and the second index. Okay, so you can also, I think, leave stuff out here. So if you just wanted the third one, you could do that. Just make sure you don't try to reference something that's not declared. Does that make sense? So that's just going to give us a third thing in the array, like so. And I think you can also do like the rest operator here as well. So if I wanted to do like first and other. other should be John and Rex, I believe. So if I were to run this, we get back John and Rex. Can you do this with nested object and multi-dimensional arrays? I think I can. Yeah, so let's say for whatever reason, okay, so I think I answered the first question. That's basically the gist of destructuring and using the REST operator. A new question came in, and since I'm on this topic, it said, can you do this with nested objects and multi-dimensional arrays? So let's say you had an array of arrays. So instead of that first index, sorry, I keep saying the first index, but really the 0th index, having Bob and Sally. Okay, so we have an array. 0th index has another array. What you want it to do is basically I could pull out the first and second like this. Okay, this I don't know if I explained that correctly, but you basically just keep nesting parentheses or curly braces, right? So this is going to destructure the first object here. So it's going to take this and then destructure these values into first and second. And then nest. Did I answer your question, Alex, about multi-dimensional arrays? Does that make sense? You basically just keep adding curly braces. Now with objects, let's say they had, I don't know, hobbies, I don't know. And they had like baseball. This is going to be a silly example. Just do apple and baseball. That doesn't make sense, but to destructure a multi or nested object, we could do the same thing. Remember, you just keep adding curly braces. So if I want to destructure these, baseball and apple, I'm pretty sure I could just say this. Actually, I think it might be a little bit different. I'll show that in a second. Yeah, so this would be, I think it's like, you know, I don't actually do this that often. Hold up a second. I think you have to do like hobbies, and then you have to then structure baseball and apple like that. So let me console log baseball and apple here and make sure that that actually works before I lie to you and tell you that I know what I'm doing. Because half the time I don't. All right, let's run this. Yes and yes. Okay, let me change this to no and yes so it makes more sense. All right, so that is how you destructure with nested objects. You basically have to, this is like the most confusing one to remember. You have to like say like what key do you want to access, and then you can put the subkeys or subproperties into more variables here. So I don't think hobbies will be defined here. If I print out hobbies, I think it's going to crash. Yeah, but baseball and apple are going to be defined. Yeah, Marie, I do have an ES6 course on Udemy. It was free for like years. I decided to just make it paid just to see if I can make some extra income. So if you want to support me in this channel, head over to Udemy and purchase that course. I think it should be like 20 bucks, but they do sales all the time, so it should be like 10 bucks. It's a lot of the stuff I'm kind of teaching in the stream right now. And I did that a long time ago when I was first like getting into making videos and stuff. So quality might not be the best, but it still might help you learn a couple of cool things. I literally just went through this. Like if you want to save yourself some money, I literally went through the site, es6features.org, and I went through from top to bottom and talked about like what all these do. So, I mean, obviously I explained more than one sentence. I kind of explain it the way I'm doing in this video, but yeah. If you are looking to support me, go check out that video. Maybe you'll learn something about ES6 stuff. Okay, so that was destructuring, and then I answered this question. Then I said I should do a podcast. I feel like, from my perspective, I don't feel like I'm good at talking about random subjects unless I have code I can look at. and people were asking me questions, but a podcast of me just sitting there talking, like I feel like I would just not know what to say. Um, that's why I like doing YouTube videos, because a lot of people ask me questions and I can make like a 5-minute video and explain the topic or the concept. But yeah, it might be interesting to do like a podcast with someone else about coding, but I just feel like doing something live, I would just get lost and not know what to say, but it's always worth trying. Do I have a course? Yep. All right, let me go back up because I skipped some things. Do we need to master data structures and algorithms to expertise JavaScript? To expertise JavaScript programming. I want to say no. Like, I think you need to know the high level concepts. Like, what is a linked list, right? In JavaScript, like if you had a list object, a linked list is basically like something like this. Okay. In a sense, right? I mean, this is just one example of a linked list, but it's a object that has a reference to another object, right? So this is an object that has a reference to another object, which has a reference to another object, and then to another object, and then finally you're going to have a child of null at some point, right? So that's a linked list. How does that help you in your day-to-day with JavaScript? I don't think it really does. Like, knowing what a linked list is doesn't help you. Knowing what a stack is doesn't help you. Like, I mean, there's arrays that you can do like DQ and InQ on and push and pops on, but do they really help you in the day-to-day? Not really. But I think to land a job, like a lot of companies, some companies, I shouldn't say a lot, some companies do quiz you on like these data structure and algorithm things, which if someone comes up to you and says, hey, show me how to code a linked list in JavaScript, and you're sitting there like, I don't know what a linked list is, then yeah, it's going to look kind of bad, especially since it's pretty easy. It's just an object that points to another object. Okay. So I think it's important to like know them and have an understanding of them. Do you use them day to day? Not really, unless you're like doing like a deep dive into building a library or a framework or something. But I recommend that you at least understand some of the big ones like linked lists, stack, a heap, a tree. Like what is a tree? Because like if you hear about when you're building websites, people always talk about what is a DOM tree. Okay. Oh, like HTML, like what is a DOM tree? This is a tree data structure. I actually get rid of all this stuff. Let me get rid of this. All right, this is probably gonna be hopefully this is okay. So what we're looking at right here, this is a tree. Okay, so it's good to understand like what exactly is a tree data structure and how do you write algorithms to traverse your tree recursively. It's probably good to understand that. Now, does that help you build out applications knowing behind the scenes that this is actually a tree data structure? No, not really, but I think it looks bad if someone asks you, what type of data structure is a DOM created with? And then you can't explain like what a DOM tree is. So there's my 2 cents on that. Probably good to know, but to master, probably useless unless you're getting into like data science and really, really convoluted algorithms to solve like computer vision and stuff like that. Hope that was a good answer. I don't know. Can you break down constructor functions and class keywords? I can, probably. Hold on. Dude, generators, I've never used a generator in my life. Like I do have an ES6 course out there where I talk about what a generator is, but I've never used it in practice. So if you wanted me to show you that, I probably have to Google it and show you. We can try doing that. That's cool though. Yeah. Sorry, Recon. Like your question, it's a lot. You know, how do you make a draggable object? I could literally make like a 20-30 minute YouTube video about trying to implement this, you know? It's like I don't wanna how about this? I will storing in the database, like this is 2 questions. How do you store it in the database? Like, are you using Mongo? Are you using MySQL? Are you using like DynamoDB, Firebase? Also, like, okay. Because I love you all, I'm gonna try to make a video about this, okay? I won't do it in the stream because it's too complex, but if I can remember to make a video about that, I'll make a new tab and just write that down. How long have I been streaming for? Dang, 2 hours, huh? Rockon says SQLite. Okay, I'll try to give you a top level overview. Okay, so how do you make a draggable object? So typically, I think in HTML, there's like a onDrag method event. So you want to make an element, you want to put an onDrag on it, and I think there's a way to. What happens when you drop? Is there an onDrop? I think there's an onDrop too. Let me go back. OnDrop. Okay, so I think you add an onDrag and onDrop to your DOM element. Your function onDrop probably needs to call some function that does an Axios call to a backend endpoint, right? So you're going to do a post request to your REST API that's going to basically store or send the XY location of where you dropped that DOM element. And then your backend, you're going to basically take the X and the Y. You're going to write a SQL statement to do like insert XY into positions. And I think that's about it. That's like the high level overview just to kind of answer your question because I don't want it to go unanswered, but I can't show you in code. I can't implement for you, but I think that's basically what you're going to need to do. You add an onDrag and onDrop to a DOM element. When you drop it, make an Axios request to your backend, have your backend save that to a database using a SQL insert statement, and then you probably want to also fetch those back when your page loads or something like that. Whew, all right, I'm getting a little tired. I might end the stream. I know there's some more questions, but should I have to learn Node.js first or Next.js? I think it would be beneficial to understand how Node.js works. Like, I don't know if you really need to know, like, really how to use Node.js, but it'd probably be useful to know some about it. Like, yeah, I don't think you need to be an expert at it. Like, you know, maybe write like a really simple Express API with it first before you go into Next.js, because I think there's ways to like, in Next, you have the ability to write your own API endpoints, right? So if I go to the docs, there's a way to do like API routes, I believe. And those API routes are going to take in some request objects and response objects. So these happen to be almost identical to how Express works, and they might use Express behind the scenes. And from that being said, it's always good to understand the underlying technologies before you start grabbing higher level frameworks and libraries. So if you understand how Express.js works, like maybe you can make a REST API with 4 to 5 routes and understand how to send back status codes, how to send back JSON, how to accept stuff, then it would be a lot easier to understand all the additional features that Next.js might be providing you on your request. Okay. But yeah, with that being said, I don't think you really need to become an expert at Node.js before you learn Next.js. But this really only if you're trying to do like your custom API routes. But if you just want to get like a static site generated using Next, like you don't need to know anything about Node other than like npm and how to run terminal commands. What else am I missing? Cliff asked for constructor function and class keywords. What time is it? 12? Alright, I'm not going to do the generator thing. I think I'm just going to do one more. Yeah, I don't know anything about Firestore or Firebase, so I can't answer that question. But I'm sure there's a way to do it. I mean, a lot of people use Firestore, so to be able to filter through 10,000, 100,000 records. There should be a way to do it, and if there's not, then I would say get away from Firestore, because I think they're going to charge you for how you access your data and stuff like that. But any test for knowing the time, space, complexity of the function? I think I do have a video out there where I kind of break down one algorithm into the time complexity. I don't do the space complexity. Again, I don't think this stuff is important. I personally don't think it's important, but maybe it is if you're trying to get an interview. If you're trying to like land a job at Google, then yeah, maybe you need to know some of this stuff. But yeah, I don't really have any tips about it. What are the basic JavaScript concepts we need to in order to land a front end dev job as a fresher? That's hard to say. I mean, like every company is different, but I think you need to be able to show that you can build like some type of website, right? Like you need to be able to build a website or web application with multiple pages with a lot of different functionality. If you can build that, I think then you're in a good position, because that's something you can take to the table and kind of argue about. Not argue about, but like discuss. You know, you actually have like a full application with like a back end and a front end. Oh, you said a front end dev job. Well, either way, you should probably know how to have your front end application talk to a back end. So find some type of free REST API out there, or set up a simple proxy and talk to like an existing API. You need to know all the fundamentals. So like any type of Udemy course that talks about JavaScript, or any type of online crash course tutorial that talks about JavaScript, you need to know all those concepts, I think. But yeah, I think landing a job is not a matter of like what concepts you know. I think it's more of like what have you built and what can you demonstrate to people that you actually know what you're doing. So if you come to the table with not actually having anything built of like substantial size, like if you just come with like a JavaScript calculator and say, I know JavaScript, I don't think people are going to hire you like that. But if you come and say, like, I built my own like social media website clone where people can log in and sign in and stuff like that, that has more like weight behind it. Wait 1 second. All right. Yeah, I could probably do something like this. Yeah, I think I know there's some more questions that y'all asked. I'm actually gonna probably wrap up this stream since I've been going for a while. The one I kind of wish I had time to cover was this one, instructors and class keyword. This is an important one to talk about, but if I ever do a stream again, maybe I'll talk about it, or I'll make a video about this one. Is there anything else that I should kind of like write down? Let's see. Can you do a video someday implementing JWT with access and refresh tokens? I think I have some out there. It might be with Vue, so yeah, maybe it's not exactly what you're looking for. But yeah, maybe I can make a better one. Like whenever people work with security and stuff, or like implement security, you got to be careful, because like people will come at you in the comments and blast you if you do one thing incorrectly. That's not like production ready. So it takes a lot more planning to make something like this. But I could probably make something for you all. Thank you. I appreciate that. Sometimes I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about, but like looking back, I realize I'm able to talk about all this stuff. So it's like so I must know something, right? All right. Any final comments or remarks? Be sure to like this video, you all, because it helps my channel grow. And then also leave me comments on. Go back through all my videos and just leave me comments on every video. That helps me out too. Just like all my videos. Just spend like the next 8 hours of your day just going through all my 200 videos and just liking everything. I appreciate that. But yeah, I hope you all learned something from the stream. I hope you guys feel like you know more about JavaScript. If you really enjoyed the stream, I could try to do this more often. I don't really stream that often because my kids only sleep at certain times and wake up at certain times. But yeah, I could do this again. Maybe I can do it on different subjects like React, just so that we can all just learn more about it. There's stuff that I don't know about React, but I would like to do a stream on React, maybe Vue, maybe APIs and stuff like that. Cool. Let's see. I just started JS today. Can you give me a guide? I don't think learning React.js takes that long. I have a video on my channel where like I talk about like the most common concepts of React. So like just a couple of hooks and like JSX. I think you can kind of hit the ground running with a small subset of React. And I don't think it takes that long to learn it. There's a ton of people out there who say they use React, and there's like a ton of stuff they don't know about it. So it's like you really don't need to know all about React to be able to make full scale applications in React. Or JavaScript today, can you guide me? If you're starting JavaScript today, I would go to freecodecamp.com and just start there. Just work through their built-in tutorials. They have a ton of resources on Free Code Camp if you're trying to learn JavaScript and web development. I'm about to sign off, so I can't really help you too much there. Yes, please. I have clicked the bill. Are you doing? Yeah, I work full time as a web developer, so that's what I'm doing for work. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, y'all. Sorry, y'all. I'm gonna drop, but have a great day, and thank you so much for watching. And happy coding.